Joining us today are Stephen Hoggett and Scott Graham, Artistic Directors of Frantic Assembly. We're here to talk about the upcoming autumn production of Othello. I wondered if you guys could talk to us a little bit about what drew you to tackle Shakespeare.
A long time ago, we were talking to Tom Morris, who actually helped the company's first productions in London. So this was quite a while ago, and it was just a really off the cuff remark. And he said, "Oh, I think it'd be really interesting if you guys tackled Othello." And to be honest, we didn't really talk about it very much at that time. So certainly didn't kind of talk about it with Tom anymore. And then we kind of had an idea about just tackling a classic. We did some work on The Changeling a few years ago, just did some research on it and developed it over a weekend, had a little look at the material and the lyricism of that language with our physicality, and enjoyed that process. And Othello was still kind of at the back of our heads. And then it was really a book called Dark Heart by Nick Davies that we both read, that we were talking to Mark Ravenhill about when we were looking at Pool No Water. And that's kind of when I think the merging of our kind of contemporary take on the classic, taking the classic and having a contemporary element involved in it, suddenly seemed to kind of really take shape and to form itself. So in lots of ways it's been quite episodic, and it's been little kind of events and conversations and people and books that have brought it together now.
And are the themes in Othello something that you particularly felt an affinity with as well?
Well, that's what Tom was trying to tell us, really. He said it's absolutely right up your street, and neither of us had read Othello. Then looking at it, it was quite surprising for someone to be so astute and tell us that's exactly what you're into, and then realise actually we are absolutely obsessed with that kind of sexual jealousy and backstabbing and friendships and when they all go wrong. So that was very exciting. But the other side of it is we're both English literature graduates, and we do have a love for this. And it might seem, just because within a lot of our work it's the energy which comes to the front and it's the movement that comes to the front, that we'd actually want to trash any kind of literary approach or any literary text. It's not the case at all. We absolutely love it, but we wouldn't have wanted to bring our world into that world any sooner than now. It's we just feel like the time is right for that.
And how will the Frantic Assembly Othello differ to others that people might have seen?
The first thing we've done is we've set it in a pub in the north. And that's been about research that we were doing in the middle of last year, which was looking at the race riots in the late 80s and kind of sporadically through the 90s. And it seemed to afford us a political holding pen for this text, because we didn't want to stay true to the traditional politics of Othello, which is about the Ottoman Empire. So we're looking for an equivalent. It did seem that region of England did seem to hold a really fascinating kind of melting pot of communities with a real kind of interracial tension, and also just the idea that in the modern age now, actually, one of the theories is that it's not so much interracial tension as religious tension, and also the idea that there's consensual apartheid between these factions of people, but there's still flashpoints between them as well. So all that world seemed to really suggest an environment that we were quite interested in on a social political level. So I think that's kind of one of the most immediate things about this production, that would be, that affords itself a modernity on stage, that it has to be a contemporary production for us to kind of get our teeth into.
Great. And how are you going to integrate the sort of movement and text elements of the Frantic Assembly movement style with the text of Shakespeare?
Sometimes you don't know the answer to that until you get in a rehearsal room.
Yeah.
The text itself has a muscularity, and our world, the world we want to explore with Othello, is a very visceral and imminently violent world. That in itself presents a physicality, but also it's a love story, and that has a very beautiful, very tender physicality, very passionate physicality, which obviously turns and becomes corrupted. there's a lot in there. Even now, just thinking about it, you know, we've got a very, very wide spectrum from the utterly brutal violence to the posturing and the kind of bravado of guys around the pool table owning their space, pool cues in hand, bottles in hand, being as big as they can be. The girls coming in and playing up in front of the boys and how that changes the physicality of the boys, that mating ground, and also how men and women connect. There's some fascinating kind of almost sexual battles existing within Othello, but also some really tender moments too, in the way that Cassio has this relationship with Bianca, but it's a very private thing. He'll slag her off to the boys, but when they're together, there's certainly a spark, there is something. And Othello and Desdemona, they are great together, and then it completely falls apart or explodes. And the tension between Iago and Emilia, you know, what's going on there? There's again a whole range of relationships which offer and afford us a vast physicality.
And you've mentioned some of the characters. This is the biggest cast that Frantic will have ever worked with. Does that present you with particular challenges directing between the two of you, or?
I think so. I mean, I think one of the things we try and do is we don't split up in the rehearsal room. So I think the challenge with this piece, because it is a much bigger story, it's a bigger project all round. So I think we'd still try and hold on to that idea about never kind of splitting the room into two, and you deal with Desdemona for half an hour and I'll deal with Rodrigo. You know, so I think there's a time challenge about that, but I think there's something about that consistency of our vision of it that's really, it's important that the cast are working with the two of us at the same time, which keep hitting them from all sides. So there's a purity to it. I think we feel slightly more equipped after working on things like Market Boy a few years ago with Rufus, where there was a huge cast on a huge stage, and I just remember there was a couple of sessions where it was kind of mildly terrifying. But towards the end of that project, I just remember the pair of us, when we actually got onto the Olivier stage, and we weren't, I mean, there was a lot of work and there was a lot, our learning curve went through the roof, putting Market Boy on that big stage. But I can remember, in terms of our kind of feeling towards it with all those people, it actually just seemed like something really exciting, and the possibilities of it being huge. Because we're normally working with 4 or 5 people, so there's something really thrilling about suddenly having a lot more bodies in the space. And I imagine it'll be the same with this, that 9 people is a lot of people to have to create energy. And like Scott said earlier, we're big on the kind of energy of a space. We've never been the most kind of, in terms of movement particularly, it's never been about the aesthetic of it as much as it is about the narrative and the energy of it. And 9 people affords us almost twice as much as what we normally have to play with. So a lot of it, I think, is really exciting for us.
Great. And finally, you've worked with lots of musicians and bands in the past in a sort of collaborative way, and this time you're working with Hybrid, and wondered if you could just tell us a bit more about that relationship.
It's something we've wanted to do for a long time. We've been massively inspired by their work, and one thing that we won't rush into that kind of collaboration. We've got too much respect for getting it right and for what each individual band achieves. So that's why Goldfrapp were the perfect band for Dirty Wonderland. That's why Lamb was perfect in our opinion for Peep Show, and the music of BT for Stockholm. For this, a Hybrid we feel are absolutely unique in that I don't think there's anybody else out there who can match 2 such different worlds, the kind of menace and pounding energy of club beats with a kind of slightly warped orchestral sound as well. You know, these 2 worlds just mix and intertwine in their stuff, and it just strikes us that's what we're going to do with Othello. There are 2 worlds. There's the lyricism of the words, the beauty of the words, those rhythms, but also there's the particular rhythms and rules of the pub. That earthy and almost ethereal mix, just as they do within the work of Hybrid. So I'm glad we waited, because we've been thinking about them for years and been inspired by them for years, but now it's the right project. And they're also from Swansea, so there's that connection too.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for talking to us, and we look forward to the autumn tour.